Three common confusions on Sandel's Rawls chapter. The first comes from the first part of the chapter when he talks about different agreements or arrangements that you can enter into. He talks about marriage, an agreement with a car repairman, talks about reciprocity and autonomy, upholding your end of the bargain. And if you begin the chapter talking about that stuff, and then you move into Rawls's veil of ignorance, his original position, his principles of justice, by the time you get into the political philosophy, you might wonder, what was all that contract stuff at the beginning even about? Well, what it's about is set up to talk about social contract theory. And the social contract is just the tacit agreement that all of us enter into, that if we behave and we pay our taxes and we obey the law, that we get to share in the mutual benefits of social cooperation, which means participate in the economy and make money, pursue our conceptions of the good, live our lives the way we would like to, have collective security through the military and the police, etc. And Rawls's political philosophy is within that social contract tradition, which is an old tradition. However, Rawls puts a unique spin on it. And this leads us into the second common confusion. The second common confusion concerns Rawls's veil of ignorance. Now, of course, the veil of ignorance is the thing that prevents the people in his thought experiment, called the original position, from knowing things about themselves that would skew their judgments about justice. Rawls argues that whenever we talk about political philosophy, or which laws should be best, or which tax system is superior and better, our personal biases and our personal interests always influence our conclusions. But Rawls argues that justice shouldn't be just a matter of people arguing for their own interests and who can be the most persuasive to get the most for themselves and to defend their interest. Instead, it should be objective. But how do we get past the fact that we're typically, either consciously or unconsciously, arguing for our own interests? Educated, rich, white males might argue for the interests of educated, rich, white males. Uneducated, homeless black women might argue for the interests of uneducated, homeless black women. We can get past this, Rawls argues, through a thought experiment. That thought experiment is the original position, and that original position asks us to imagine, what if we could blind ourselves from knowing anything about our interests, about our preferences, about our situations that would influence our judgment? What if we could put people behind a veil of ignorance and prevent them from knowing how much money they have, how much intelligence they have, what their natural talents are, whether they're a man or a woman, or they don't identify with either of those genders? Maybe it's the case, or what if they don't know what religion they are? If we could block a person from knowing all of this stuff, in fact, if we could block everyone from knowing all this stuff, then what principles of justice would they agree to? How would they form society? Arguing for their own interests, being self-interested, advocating not in a benevolent way to make everybody the happiest, but instead for their own personal interests, but at the same time not knowing what their personal interests are. Sometimes people hear this argument and they reject it because they say, there's no way that we could actually block people from knowing whether or not they're a man or a woman, whether they're a Christian, a Muslim, an agnostic, a Jew, etc., whether they're gay or straight, whether they're Bill Gates or a homeless person. But, of course, it's the case that we can't block people from that information. Of course, there's no magic pill or no simulation that we could run people through to prevent them from knowing all of these things. That's why it's a thought experiment. As long as you have imagination and you can ask yourself, well, what sort of a society would I endorse if I didn't know those things about myself? As long as you can do that, as long as you can be creative and think it through, the fact that we couldn't actually prevent people from knowing those things isn't a real criticism of the arguments. That's the second common confusion, that just because we, the worry is that, well, we can't actually bring that about, therefore the entire argument is awful. Rawls never intended this to be presented as something that could actually happen. It's simply a thought experiment. The third common confusion concerns the word liberal. Sometimes students will read early in the chapter the word liberal and they'll associate all the negative stereotypes that are out there with that word, many of them deserved. However, Rawls's political philosophy is only liberal insofar as it's a very abstract political philosophy that we would contrast with libertarianism, but in the general classical John Locke type, American Founding Fathers type liberal tradition generally understood. So please don't see the word liberal and then immediately discount the political philosophy and say something or think something to the effect of, this guy must want to spread the wealth evenly, regardless of citizens' contributions to the economy. He must want to enforce some sort of a strict material egalitarianism where everybody has exactly the same amount of money. He wants to take from the rich and give to the poor, regardless of whether or not they actually deserve it or do anything, and make sure that nobody has any more than anybody else. That's not the case at all. If you actually read the Principles of Justice, Rawls' second has the difference principle built into it. And the difference principle, of course, states that inequalities in wealth and income are justifiable, a good thing, we should promote them, insofar as they benefit the least well-off group. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, I won't go through the entire argument. You can see that in my full lecture on the chapter on Rawls' political philosophy. But if you were behind this veil of ignorance and you didn't know who you were, whether you were a homeless person or a rich person, you would probably say that, well, it's a good idea to allow people to have more or less money based on their contribution, because that would give them an incentive to perhaps go to school, save their money, invest, which ultimately would benefit all of us, because we'll have brain surgeons and we'll have people that come about with cool business ideas that'll raise our standard of living. But at the same time, if I myself have some terrible physical ailments, or if I have mental handicaps, or if I fall on terrible bad luck, I'd like to have some sort of a safety net to make sure that I'm okay. And in fact, if I'm born into a family that otherwise wouldn't be able to provide a good education for me, if they wouldn't provide a nurturing environment, it sure would be nice for the state to be able to pick up that slack with a good education system, perhaps to ensure that I had maybe basic health care, etc. So don't hear the word liberal and discount the entire political philosophy. The word itself may have some deserved criticisms, but those aren't necessarily, or they shouldn't necessarily be associated with Rawlsian political philosophy. Please read the arguments and think about the implications of the actual policies for yourself, and don't discount it just because of that word. So here you go, 3 common confusions on the Rawls chapter. Hope this is helpful.